0 o'clock. Opening. The year is 1953. Somewhere in a sterile government facility, a man in a suit signs a document that will authorize one of the most disturbing programs in American history. No press release, no public announcement, no consent forms distributed to the thousands of men, women, and children who would soon become unwilling participants in a secret so dark it would take decades to surface. What you are about to witness is not fiction. Every event, every name, every program referenced in this documentary is drawn from declassified government files, congressional testimonies, and investigative journalism that broke the surface only after relentless pressure from the public and the press. Welcome to the shadow side of government science. Welcome to the truth they buried. 2 o'clock, the beginning of Project MKUltra. To understand the full scope of what happened, we have to go back to the Cold War, a period of paranoia so intense that moral boundaries became negotiable inside the corridors of power. The Central Intelligence Agency, freshly minted and operating in a world of existential fear, believed the Soviet Union had developed methods of psychological manipulation, mind control, brainwashing, techniques that could turn loyal soldiers into traitors, break the will of prisoners, and reshape human behavior like clay. They could not allow themselves to fall behind. In April of 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles officially authorized Project MKUltra. The program's stated goal was to develop mind control techniques that could be weaponized in the Cold War. The methods they chose to achieve this goal would haunt the American conscience for generations. At its core, MKUltra was a program of human experimentation. Subjects were administered LSD, barbiturates, mescaline, heroin, and other chemical compounds without their knowledge. They were subjected to electroconvulsive therapy at extreme voltages. They were kept awake for days through sensory deprivation. They were hypnotized. They were psychologically tortured, and most of them had no idea it was happening. The program operated across 80 institutions, universities, hospitals, prisons, mental health facilities. Researchers at these locations received CIA funding channeled through front organizations, allowing the agency to maintain plausible deniability while the experiments continued. 4 o'clock. The victims. The people chosen for these experiments were not enemy combatants. They were not foreign spies. They were American citizens, many of them among the most vulnerable members of society. Prisoners in federal penitentiaries were told they were participating in studies on diseases. They agreed to help their country and received doses of hallucinogenic drugs instead. Some were dosed repeatedly for weeks, their psychological states deteriorating with each session while researchers took notes. Patients in psychiatric hospitals were particularly targeted. The logic was cruel in its simplicity. Who would believe a mentally ill patient who claimed the government was poisoning them? These individuals, already stripped of credibility by their diagnoses, became ideal test subjects precisely because their testimony could be dismissed. Perhaps most disturbing were the operations conducted in what the CIA called safe houses in New York and San Francisco. These were apartments fitted with one-way mirrors where agents would lure unsuspecting civilians, often sex workers and their clients, and secretly dose them with LSD while watching the results from behind the glass. The operation was given a name that would become infamous, Operation Midnight Climax. And then there was Frank Olson. Frank Olson was a government scientist, a biological weapons researcher who worked for the Army. In November of 1953, Olson attended a retreat at a remote cabin in Maryland. During the gathering, CIA officer Sidney Gottlieb secretly dosed the drinks of Olson and several colleagues with LSD without their knowledge. Days later, Frank Olson fell from the window of a New York hotel, 13 floors to the street below. His death was ruled a suicide. His family never believed it. Decades later, in 1994, Olson's body was exhumed. A forensic examination found evidence of blunt force trauma to the head before the fall. The case was reopened. It was never fully resolved. Frank Olson's son, Eric, has spent his entire adult life demanding answers that the government has never fully provided. 6 o'clock. The institutions and the scientists. MKUltra did not operate in a vacuum of lone rogue agents. It was built on a network of willing academic and medical professionals who sacrificed their ethical obligations at the altar of government funding and ideological fear. Dr. Ewan Cameron was perhaps the most notorious of these figures. A respected psychiatrist and the president of multiple professional associations, Cameron conducted experiments at McGill University in Montreal that went far beyond anything his peers were willing to attempt. Cameron believed he could erase a patient's existing mental patterns and reprogram them from scratch. He called it psychic driving. To achieve this, he kept patients in medically induced sleep for weeks, sometimes months at a time. He subjected them to electroconvulsive therapy at doses up to 40 times the standard intensity. He played recorded messages on loop through headphones while his patients slept, attempting to overwrite their identities with new ones. His patients did not consent to these procedures. Many were admitted to his facility for mild conditions, anxiety, minor depression, and they emerged as shells. Some could not remember their names, some forgot their children, some regressed to a childlike state and never recovered. Cameron received CIA funding channeled through a front organization. He continued his work until the mid-1960s. He died in 1967, never having faced legal accountability for what he had done. The CIA's involvement with Cameron's work was declassified only in 1977, after a Freedom of Information Act request by journalist John Marks unearthed documents that were supposed to have been destroyed. And that brings us to the destruction. In 1973, as Watergate tore through Washington and congressional investigators began looking into CIA activities, Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. Thousands of documents were shredded. The intent was clear: erase the evidence before anyone could fully account for what had been done. But they missed a box. 8 o'clock. The unraveling stored in a records facility in Warrenton, Virginia. A collection of financial documents tied to MKUltra survived the purge. They had been misfiled, separated from the main cache that was destroyed. In 1977, these documents were discovered during a routine search. The revelation triggered a congressional investigation. Senator Ted Kennedy chaired Senate hearings that brought CIA officials before the American public for the first time to answer for MKUltra. What emerged from those hearings was a picture of systematic disregard for human life operating at the highest levels of the United States government. Former CIA Director Stansfield Turner testified under oath. Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who had run MKUltra and who personally dosed Frank Olson, was called to testify. He spoke carefully, invoking memory failures and the complexity of the Cold War context. He was never criminally charged. Victims came forward. Some had no idea until the hearings that what had happened to them was part of a government program. A woman who had been treated at Cameron's facility learned for the first time that her prolonged sleep treatments and the voices she had heard were not standard psychiatric care. They were experiments. President Ford had already issued a formal apology to Frank Olson's family in 1975 after the Church Committee first began exposing CIA abuses. Congress paid the family $750,000. It was not an admission of murder. It was described as a moral obligation. But MKUltra was not the only program. It was not even the only program running simultaneously. Operation Sea Spray saw the U.S. Navy spray bacterial agents over the city of San Francisco in 1950 to test how a biological weapon might spread through an urban population. Residents inhaled the bacteria without any awareness. In the weeks that followed, there was a notable spike in pneumonia cases in the city's hospitals. One man died. Operation LAC saw the military disperse zinc-cadmium sulfide particles over American cities including St. Louis and Minneapolis, targeting low-income neighborhoods and public housing projects. They told no one. The residents of these areas, disproportionately Black Americans, were not informed they were being used as data points in a military dispersion study. 10 o'clock. The deeper pattern. What MKUltra and these companion programs reveal is not the story of a few rogue scientists or a handful of misguided bureaucrats. They reveal something far more disturbing, a systemic culture within the national security apparatus that viewed ordinary citizens as acceptable collateral in the pursuit of power and advantage. The logic was always the same. The ends justified the means. The threat was existential. Sacrifices had to be made, and the people making those decisions never placed themselves or their families on the list of those who would be sacrificed. The Church Committee investigations of the mid-1970s produced over 50,000 pages of declassified material documenting CIA abuses spanning 2 decades. It remains one of the most significant moments of governmental self-examination in American history, and yet many of the individuals responsible faced no legal consequences.